Hi, my name is Erin Driesen, and I'm going to share some of the ways that I have changed a lesson that I taught this year and use some of the classroom instruction network strategies to change it and make it more meaningful for my students. This year, Orange City Christian, where I teach, I'm the resource room teacher at Orange City Christian. So I wear a lot of different hats, and one of those hats this year was teaching a group of fifth grade students math. So this class had a wide range of abilities, and so there was 28 students and have the wide range. We just thought it would be more beneficial for the students if we kind of broke them up a little bit. So we were usually on the same pace as far as the lessons were at, but I just took 8 or 9 students into my classroom, and we talked about the same concept, but just kind of a slower pace. The ratio was lower that they could ask questions. It wasn't so intimidating. And so that's why I wanted to change one of these lessons, because I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily confident in my math teaching ability, especially for fifth grade students. I can think of a lot of lessons I probably want to change now, but since I'm in the resource room in a small school, that's kind of one of the hats that I was drawn, and so we dealt with it. And it ended up being something that I really did enjoy. It just took me some time to adjust. And also, another reason it took me time to adjust is because at Orange City Christian, we got a new curriculum, Go Math, this year, and there is so much stuff in Go Math. And so this was a huge adjustment, not only for me, but for the students and all the other teachers. And so thinking about how I would teach these lessons the second time, I can definitely see how some of the classroom instruction that works strategies would be beneficial when teaching, especially this curriculum, because there's so much in here and the kids were just getting overwhelmed. And so the chapter that I was really trying to aim on was in chapter 2. We talked about division. And so this is a whole unit, and this is only one part of that. The lesson that I changed was how we interpret remainders, and this is one of the last lessons in the unit. So we had talked prior lessons before how to divide, so the kids had a pretty good background knowledge of how to divide, and this particular lesson was talking about, so we have a remainder, and now what do we do with it? And so I did like some of the ways that they taught it in the book, but looking at the classroom instruction that works strategies as well, I kind of took out some pieces and things like that. And so I'll just like to share with you a few ways that I changed my lesson after looking over some of the new strategies, and hopefully that will be beneficial for my students. I know it was good for me to think of this lesson in that framework, really challenging myself to implement some of these strategies so that my students could be successful. The first one that I changed was just really engaging their prior knowledge when I'm setting my objectives. Objectives weren't necessarily something I talked to my students before, because sometimes I felt like when I said, this is what we're going to learn today, the kids would be shut down automatically because they felt like they couldn't do that. But in fact, there's a lot of times my students would say to me, we're not learning anything new today, are we? Because they were just so frustrated and overwhelmed with the way that this curriculum was being taught. And so I thought one of the ways within strategies was to use their prior knowledge and how we can use that to their benefit. Because, yeah, we had been talking about division for quite some time. So they did have a lot of prior knowledge of the topic, and I wanted them to kind of gain some confidence in that. So the first thing I can see myself doing, not only in this lesson, but all the math lessons that I'm teaching, is lay out the essential question. Now I know this is kind of backwards, so I'm sorry. But it says, what do we do with remainders? So through this lesson, lessons prior, the kids had remainders when they were doing their division, but they just had to write like 33 remainder 2. They didn't really even know what that meant. So I wanted to say, like, we know what remainders are, and now we're going to learn about what do we do with remainders when we see a remainder. So you know you've gotten a remainder before, but now let's find out what we're going to do with that remainder. And I thought that was kind of an obvious way, and I don't know why I hadn't thought about it before, but to engage the prior knowledge of all this division, and also have conversations that they've wanted to have, but they weren't ready for because of the curriculum. And so another way I thought, so we were talking about division and gaining their confidence, because they do know what division is just kind of asking the students, what do you know about division? What have we learned? And making some sort of like a concept web or something, just having division in the middle. You tell me, what did we learn? And I think gaining their confidence, especially in the resource room or in my kind of classes where maybe they feel like they aren't smart enough because they're with me, that's really beneficial. Say like, hey, this is what you know, and we're going to use this again today. So I'm hoping that this conversation opens up things like numerator, quotient, denominator, and we can have those conversations and show them, like, this is not new, overwhelming stuff. You guys know what we're talking about. And I think that's a good way to start a lesson instead of having them feel defeated right away and giving up right away. Showing them that growth mindset, that they are capable and they know what they're doing, and they can be successful with this because we have spent so much time before. And so because of that, I want to really engage their prior knowledge and show them how this objective ties to all the other objectives we've had before. And I can see how that can help them be successful, because if you feel confident in something and have some knowledge, well, you're going to feel a lot better about coming into something new. So that's how I like to start my lesson, just showing them, hey, this is what we're doing. There's some anticipatory set things in the textbook that I would probably do with the students. There's some story problems and things. And then after that, when I'm teaching them what they can do with the remainder, there's really 3 options that I wanted to teach them. And this wasn't in the book, but I thought that this was maybe a better way for them to learn how they can use the remainder. I remember teaching this lesson before, and I got really frustrated with the student, not with the students necessarily, but with the idea of when they were starting their assignment, they couldn't remember the strategies that they needed to use. So they would get a remainder and they wouldn't remember what to do with it. And so I was hoping by giving them some sort of graphic organizer for their notes, all of their notes could be in one place, and then they could refer to that back when they were doing their assignment or their other work. And so that was kind of a no-brainer for me too, and one of the strategies, note-taking and also graphic organizers. And so the 3 options that I had found I try to make them in terms that they understood. So the 3 options that I found for what to do when you have a remainder are round it, drop it, and split it. And I like that because it was catchy, easy for them to remember, and then the definition or how to use it was kind of in the word. So I made this graphic organizer. This says term, and this says definition, and then this says example. So what I was hoping for was when we talk about these things, I would be leading the instruction, obviously, but they would be filling in this graph for all 3, round it, drop it, split it. So I was hoping that they would be able to write in round it, and then I would write the definition on the board of what does round it mean. And there's a few, couple lines for each one, so not very intimidating. So for example, I'll go through round it. So for the term, they'd write round it. And for the definition, I would write, you use this when your answer needs to be a whole number. And you need to make sure that you have enough of something, so you round it up. And then I would ask students, when would you need enough of something? If you were going to share something, or if you needed tables for a group of people, or if you needed buses for a group of people, then you would want to round up to make sure that you had enough. And so then they could write the definition there, that your answer needs to be a whole number, and you want to make sure that you have enough of something. And then I had printed out 3 examples that I would give the students, just kind of story problems, and saying that I know this is a round up or a split it or a drop it, and explain why. And I was hoping that when we had talked about the term, defined it, did a couple examples together from the book too. They had some examples, and also just talking to them, that they would be able to look through these 3 examples and decide which one should go in the example box. And be able to put that in there so that they can refer to it later. And so what I like about that is it keeps it organized. They have the 3 terms here. They also have the definition that's spelled out in words that they understand. And that they can kind of remember, but then also the example that they can refer back to later, so that if they're working on something and they aren't quite sure, maybe they're stuck between 2 options, maybe drop it or split it, then they could refer back to this and say, oh yeah, there was an example there, and that helped. I remember thinking when they were working on their assignments, they didn't even remember the words. And so if they had this out for them with the 3 options while they're working on the assignments, that they could experience success a lot easier because it's available for them. And so I really liked the idea of using some notes. It doesn't have to be writing pages of notes, but just something that is there for them, accessible, and that they can use to be successful on their assignment. And so I think that was another awesome strategy that I guess I knew, but being pushed to put that into my lessons and be thinking of that all the time was a really good thing. The next thing I wanted to work on was just giving them more time to practice. I felt like before they weren't ready for the assignment because I hadn't given them enough time to practice. And math sometimes can be monotonous with, here's your book, practice some problems. And while that's good too, I thought another way, we could think of something a little more fun and engaging for them. So what I found, or what I wanted to use, was an activity with QR codes. So whenever the kids hear QR codes, they get so excited because they know that means they'll have an iPad. And also what I like about QR code is that it gets kids moving around a little bit. They're not just sitting in their desk writing problems. And so one of the ways, something I do in my classroom is we're already differentiated in a way because we have a group of kids outside of the classroom and we're doing different pace, different things. But I also give them color groups for math just because in my groups, I want to make sure, I know there's some certain students that would get lost or depend on their group mates, and I just want to make sure that they are understanding it as well. And so I have what I call color groups in my math, and they know exactly what color they are. Sometimes they change, but not very often. So I have about 3 groups of 3 or so, and so they know the color groups, and so for this activity, I would divide them into color groups. And so what this activity has is I would have all of these word problems taped around my room, and it has a problem. Of course, it's backwards. Okay, so with their group numbers, they have to talk about, okay, what do we need to do to divide first? And what this activity comes with is a recording sheet, which I really like. So they would match up number 7 with number 7. They won't necessarily need to do it in numerical order because all these are here for them, so they could kind of work around the room wherever there's available space. And so they could work out the math problem here. And then on the bottom here it says, am I going to round the denominator, drop it, or split it? And so they know right away, oh yeah, we use those 3 words, and so they can use those words on the activity. And so the part that they like the best is then they get an iPad, and we have about 1 to 3 iPads in the resource room, and then they can open a QR scanner app that they can just, let's see if I can show you this. They can just bring up to the QR code, and they can scan that code here. And once they get that code, it will show them the answer. Yeah, the brightness isn't very good. The answer to the division problem. So the answer is 32 remainder 1. And then it tells them what to do with the remainder. It says drop it. And so the cat food would last 32 days. And so I like that it has the instant gratification, or they need to make a change right away. They can tell the answer and also what to do with remainder, and then also what the answer to the question would be. And so there are 8 of these. So I would have these around my classroom, and the groups could just move once they get them done. Obviously, they would have to, we have kind of group rules that they know. They have to agree on the answer, and if there is some confusion with that, or if they can't get to the same answer, then they have to come find me, and we talk about, okay, what makes sense. And so the rules of group work are laid out pretty good for them, so they know that. And so another way I can see myself differentiating this is for some groups it might take them quite a bit longer than other groups. So maybe I would come up to them and just say, hey, do 5 or do 3, maybe if it took them that long. Or obviously some groups can do all 8. And so I can see myself, I always walk around with them, make sure they understand. So I can see myself just telling a group, hey, you're doing a really great job, just do 5 more and then we'll be done. Just because we have a small group of students, so I don't want one group to be sitting waiting while the other group is still working on that. And so that's one way that I thought would get them around, some kinesthetic movement, but also differentiate with the grouping and also with the amount of work that they need to complete if needed. You know, thinking about how this lesson went last time, that might be needed. Some extra, okay, you've shown that you know, just because your pace is slower doesn't mean I need to make you do this for a longer amount of time. And so what I want the students to do is they would hand in their sheets that they recorded their answers with the drop it, share it, or drop it, split it, or round it, and they would give that to me. They would hand it in, and that would kind of be a way that I could evaluate. And then also something else that our curriculum has that I really do enjoy is they differentiate their assignments. And so I do think it's important to have practice in the classroom, but also give them some time to practice it on their own, especially since this activity is with groups. I want to see what they know individually. And so this curriculum already comes with a couple different options. This is called the reteach worksheet. And what I really like about this is that it has some stuff up here that kind of reteaches what we learned. And so one of the things with parents is they would get so frustrated with how the curriculum was being taught. So if I would send this home, then they could be like, oh, they could refer back to this. And also they could take home their graphic organizer, and hopefully through that they would be able to experience success and get it finished. And these assignments aren't very long. There's only about 4 questions. I just like parents to be involved in knowing what's happening, and also for me to know, okay, you did this on your own. How did it go? So if I, while they're doing the QR code activity, if I could notice that some students are really struggling, I would give them this reteach worksheet. Now there will be some students who maybe will fly through the QR code activity. And so this book also has an enrichment activity. And so it's the same amount of, a couple more questions, I guess, but the same topic. And it gives them some other ways to show that that they know what they're doing. So it's a different activity. There's not the teaching, but it's still pushing them, and they're still doing the same idea. And I like that it has the worksheet too, so that they don't necessarily know, oh, you're just getting a worksheet. I like to hand these out while they're leaving, so that they don't see which one. I'm sure they talk about it maybe, but they understand. A lot of kids will ask. They love this reteach worksheet because if they forget how it went or how I taught it, then they can refer right back to this. And I found out that parents like that a lot too. And so those are just a few different ways that I wanted to implement some of those classroom instruction that work strategies. So I liked using the objective to connect to prior knowledge. I thought that was really beneficial for my students. It could be beneficial. I also like the note-taking and the graphic organizer. This was kind of a no-brainer. And so I'm kind of upset that I didn't think about it before, because now they have this to carry with them all the time. And then so that was the note-taking and the graphic organizer. And then just giving them more practice. Not necessarily just sitting down and doing problems, but moving, working with others, but also doing what I asked. And so a good activity will have them learning without even knowing it. So I really appreciated that. And then so differentiating with that, and then also differentiating with the assignment. And that is something I like to do a lot. I like to differentiate a lot. And so that was kind of a good reminder of why that's important. And so I really enjoyed this class, and it took some work to use those strategies, but it wasn't a big undertaking, and I can definitely see now that it would be beneficial for my students. So thank you for pushing us to do this. I know I don't have students, so I'm sorry about that, but hopefully this is just as good as I can explain to you the changes that I would like to make after learning about those strategies. So thanks.